Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Python for Beginners. In the last episode we talked about how to download and install Python, as well as how to print your first hello world statement, making sure everything worked properly. And in this episode we're going to talk about the very basics of the assigning variables and data types. In Python there are four main data types that you're going to be concerned with when programming. There are a few other ones, but for the simplicity of this tutorial, we're going to go over the four most common data types used throughout Python programming. But first, before we get into any of that, I want to show you guys how you can make your first Python file. So if you remember from this window, this is the interpreter. This is not where you're going to be wanting to type several dozens lines of code. Instead, there is a much better way, and it'll probably work out for you a lot better than using it through here. So to get a new file started, you're gonna want to go to where it says File, click there. Then you're gonna either click Control N as the shortcut, or just click New File. Then a window like this should pop up. I've increased the font size on mine, so it's probably going to be a lot bigger than what you might see. But either way, you should be a completely blank canvas with a little blinking text field indicator. We're going to go ahead and click File, and we're going to click Save. And I'm just going to name this Episode 1. Oops, 1. And I'm going to save it to the desktop for easy access. And by clicking Save, you should see right here the file has appeared on our desktop. We're going to focus on two main aspects of, or two, I should say, sorry, four main aspects of data types and how to assign them to variables. So in Python, we're concerned with mainly four data types. We have integers, float values, string values, and Boolean. The main difference between them is obviously what kind of value they hold. So for example, you can see that integers are whole numbers. They can be either negative or positive, and they can go on for however much you want. There is a capacity. There is basically a, a cap where you can't enter a value higher than that amount. The program will either crash or it just will not accept it. So just keep in mind that there is a limit, although it's a very, very high number. I believe it's in like the millions or even hundreds of millions. So you probably, for a beginner programming class like this, you won't be worried about that. And of course, again, it can go either positive or it can go negative in either direction. The next up is the float. And float is very similar to integer in that it can be a positive or a negative number. However, for float values, they are decimal numbers. So numbers like negative zero point 0.1, negative zero point 0.2, negative zero point 0.3, or positive zero point 0.1, positive zero point 0.2, positive zero point 0.3, the list goes on. You can even have numbers like 0.01 or 0.001. You get the point. It's basically just like integers, except it's decimal values instead of whole numbers. Next up is string, and this is where a lot of people get confused because you might be looking here and saying, "Oh, well, there's hello," like a text. String is obviously text that the user can see, and it's usually um, letters and numbers, or letters and non-alphanumeric characters. So like the tilde key or the dash or the bracket. All those stuff can be string characters. And what you're probably wondering is, well, okay, we have hello, oops, we have ABC, we have XYZ, but why do we have 1, 2, 3? Isn't that technically an integer? Well, it is if it didn't have these quotation marks. A defining characteristic of a string variable is that it's got the double quotes around it. Now, if I were to remove these double quotes, as you can see here, then this would no longer be a string. This would be an integer. But because I used the double quotes, the program thinks that I'm using this as a, maybe if I was using it as an address or something, that I'm not actually going to be manipulating the number itself. And then finally, we have Boolean. And as you can see, it's obviously a true or false value. True meaning yes, and then false meaning no. Um, In later stages of programming, which we'll get to in this tutorial, Boolean variables are very powerful. They can pretty much determine whether a certain amount of code runs or doesn't run, as well as you can even loophole projects using a simple true or false value. So, and that's pretty much the two main ones. So let's see what that looks like in our IDE. So I'm going to assign 4 variables, each with a unique data type. So let's say for variable A, let's just do the number 2. We'll press enter to go to the next line. For B, we'll do a float value of 3.0. And then for C, we'll do a string. We'll type hello because why not? And for D, we will type a Boolean value. We can choose true or false. So we can do true or false. Oops. And as you can see, once I enter the word, it turns an orange color. That's because true and false and a bunch of other conditional functions and keywords in Python are color coded, at least on my IDE, to orange. So now we have these 4 variables. Let's see what we can do with them. Well, we can obviously do some basic math because obviously you would know that if you add 2 numbers together, you should get a different number, right? So let's do a print statement, and let's do A, which is obviously 2, and let's add just 2. Why not? We're going to go ahead and save this. So Control S, and then a shortcut key to launch the program in the interpreter mode is F5. So we're going to click F5 here. But as you can see, we added 2 to the letter A, which is also 2, and we get 4 as our answer. Now, let's see what happens if we were to add 2 to, actually, let's do it this way. Now let's do the next one, B. So B is a 3.0, right? Or you could say 3. But let's see what happens when I just leave it like this, B plus 2, and I launch the program. So you see that actually, instead of printing out 5, which would have been equally as correct, instead we print 5.0. The fact that 3, or B, is a float value, which means that the answer, no matter what you do with it, if you add a number, if you subtract a number, if you multiply, divide, with the exception of floor division, which we'll get into later, any of those basic operators will cause your resulting number to be a float value by default. It doesn't matter if the float value is exactly like 3.0 or 2.0 or 10.0, whatever. It will always be a float value as the answer. So that's some basics with the integer and double. And like I said, in the next episode, we're going to go over some basic operands and what their symbols are in Python, and as well as how to use them. So obviously, if we print just C, you'll notice that, of course, we get our hello statement. And a cool thing you can do with programming is you can actually add this to custom messages. So let's say, for example, I wanted to include my name at the end of this statement so that it says, hello, Aiden. Well, let's do this. I'm going to do print C, and then I'm going to add a plus sign, and we're going to add another double quotations and my name. And we'll do an exclamation mark because it's happy to say hello. And then we'll click print. So don't worry about the spacing here. That's because I forgot to put a space here. If I go ahead back here and do a space like that, so now it's quotation mark and then a space and then my name, it should fix itself. Yep, and there you can see that now it's fixed. So this is one example of concatenating strings. Again, we'll get into all that later on in the series. But basically, you can use this if you want to make custom messages. You can use a string value and concatenate it with another string value and come up with some pretty interesting and wacky combinations. And so that's the basics with string. And now if I tried doing something like this, where let's say I wanted to add a number to a string, watch what happens. So you can see here in this like pinkish text that obviously you can only concatenate string and not integer to string. Whoops. And what that basically means is since C is a string value and 2 is an integer value, you cannot concatenate a string value with an integer value without first converting the integer value to a string. And let me show you what that looks like. Um, you don't have to worry about it for now, but basically I'm going to turn this, oops, I'm going to turn this number into a string. Let me see where it is. How do I do this? Oh, right. str, so that's a string. Now watch if I do that, click enter, you can see now that it actually added the 2 to the end of this. Because what I had to do is I had to convert the 2 from an integer to a string. So that's the basics of that. And then last but not least, we have our Boolean value. So don't worry about this first part. To demonstrate how Boolean works, I'm going to do a simple if-else statement, and we'll get into if-else statements and all that later on. We'll probably do that in the next episode along with the operators, just to kind of jumble them together. We might actually be able to do a quick little program by doing that. But anyways, I'm going to show you quickly how something works with true or false values. So let's say I have two if-else statements. Let's say I have if D. I'm going to do print first statement. Then we'll do if not D, print, second statement. So take a quick moment to think about it and just explain or think to yourself what's going to happen. Which of these two statements is going to print, or will they both print, or what? So take a moment to think about that. Okay. So let's go ahead and actually launch the program and see what happens. So if you guessed first statement and first statement only, you were correct. And the reason for this is because when I initially set D to true, that's basically saying if D is true. And that's basically what this statement is saying. If D, which literally translates to if true, go ahead and print this or do whatever is in this segment of code. Now, if I had set it to the opposite, if I set it to false, then this would have been true because if not D means if not true. So if I went ahead and set this as false, let's see what happens. There you can see now the second statement printed, which means if not D, which means if not true, which in this case it's not, is false, go ahead and print the second statement. So that's pretty much how true false works. It's a very nifty tool when it comes to especially some more complex programs, like if you're taking input from a user. But that's pretty much the basics of Boolean. And just a quick addition to that, you can name these variables whatever you want. The general rule is to use letters. You can use numbers in there, although personally, from my perspective, I usually use letters, and I do a camel case where basically if I wanted to write, let's say add number, you can see that the first letter in add is lowercase, but the first letter in the second word number is capitalized. This is a good habit to follow in programming, just because it makes the variable names easier to read, as well as makes you able to differentiate between the other types of syntax you'll be using in Python. So that about wraps up the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave it in the comments section. I'll try my best to get to all of them. If you have any questions or anything like that, I'm always open to suggestions. So if you have anything that you want to add on to the video that maybe might help me make this tutorial a lot more user-friendly, please let me know. I will take that into consideration. But anyways, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will be uploading the next video, which will be, of course, about operators and maybe get into if-else statements, depending on the complexity. But yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.